I just maintained my curiosity and kept going to events, putting myself out there, making sure people knew who I was, and it just like exploded, I
But it
guess, in
also
that
sounds like
regard.
you're not just like your intentions. Obviously, like there's a selfish aspect to networking, like
Sure.
just by nature, the nature of it. But it just sounds like you're the kind of person where your intention behind these relationships is like, oh, I want to make sure that this is mutually beneficial. Welcome back to the Startup Wisconsin podcast, a show where you can learn about Wisconsin's growing tech scene through stories of startups, founders, investors, and the talented people making it all happen. Today, I'm talking with Nick Myers, who recently sold his Madison-based startup, RedFox AI, to Recovery.com, where he is now the director of AI innovation. Nick's story shows how much relationships and proximity matter in Wisconsin's startup scene, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect. Nick's company, RedFox AI, tackled one of the trickiest problems in AI. How do you make sure it doesn't hallucinate when someone's health and safety is on the line? We talked about the technical stuff behind all that. We also dive into some bigger questions, like where AI is heading and what it means for jobs in Wisconsin and everywhere else in the future. He also shares some solid advice about networking in Wisconsin's startup scene. It's less about collecting business cards and more about genuinely trying to help people out. And I couldn't agree more. So let's jump into my conversation with Nick Myers.
It's been a fantastic journey. That 5 years, albeit like in the grand scheme of things, 5 years isn't really that long of a period of time, but let's just say I'm surprised this red hair is not gray in that 5-year period. But yeah, it's been an exciting journey. Of course, running a startup, it has its peaks, it has its valleys, but my co-founder and I, I'd like to think that we did ultimately accomplish what we set out to do initially, and very grateful to say that we've been able to exit the company, and the next chapter looks very exciting.
I'm curious, like, how would you describe, to like layman's terms or to the general public, what is or what was RedFox AI and the solution and the problem space that you were trying to solve within like healthcare?
Yeah, so our overall vision was, how can we make healthcare more accessible? And then that's a really big vision, right? But we were working to condense that down into an AI tool that you could talk to if you were taking a home lab test. So this really emerged coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Everybody was taking an at-home COVID test. Nobody had a lot of experience taking a home lab test, let alone a home COVID test at the time. And what we really started seeing, as my co-founder, Brett Brooks, and I had already been working in the conversational AI space for a few years at that time, is, wow, people are really struggling to take these. And that really forced me to reflect on my own experience. I am a survivor of childhood leukemia. I was diagnosed with that at the age of 8. And I just remember countless times, Jacob, watching my parents having to struggle, either giving me some type of therapeutic or a shot or use some type of medical device, with the only information they had available being the instructions for use that are written by smart scientific people for FDA approval. They're not really written for people like my parents, the average person, to like understand and navigate effectively. So we decided to work at solving that problem. And really, before AI was anywhere close to where it's at now,
Yeah,
just technologically and in the public consciousness, we decided to build our own software that you could talk to in natural language like you or I are talking now, that would help walk a person through any home lab test. And that was the vision. And ultimately, we went through a couple different repositionings, the most recent one being we became more of a training support and continuing education tool for med devices. But with that being said, the vision was always to make healthcare more accessible and reduce barriers, and specifically leverage this incredible technology to do it that now is just, truthfully, Brett and I joke about this all the time, from when we got our start in 2016 working with Amazon Alexa tools, and you had to like manually type everything in that you wanted Alexa to say, and that's how you would program it. Of course, there was some AI magic behind there too, but not like it is now, where even in the 3 years since ChatGPT has come to market, to see just this explosion of large language models and the capability of this technology is just astounding.
Yeah, I do have a question around like the language models and things. I was looking at the recovery.com post about the acquisition, and something you talk about with augmented generation is you call it RAG, constrained RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to minimize hallucinations. Because I know that's still like a thing in all the models, especially like when you're asking for how do you do this, or like what's the news on that, or give me the most recent data on this, and it'll like make up statistics and whatever. And obviously that's something that, the healthcare space and obviously like finance and all these other big, corporate enterprise level type databases are like, we can't afford to have hallucinations. And healthcare specifically, like people might die because of hallucinations, stuff like that. So yeah, how did you kind of approach that like 5 years ago versus today? And do you feel like that problem has really gotten any better or worse because of the scale of things that are happening? I'm just kind of curious how you think about it.
Yeah, great question. I mean, and I think to kick it off by saying that, as we had formally founded RedFox in 2020, I simultaneously at the time was doing a lot of work in the data privacy space. I got connected with a former colleague he's still a colleague of mine. We just haven't caught up in a while, John Stein, who came from Intel. He had some very high up positions at Macy's and some other notable retailers, but he essentially wanted to form an organization around that time that was just focused on voice technology, because that's where we got our start and what we were working with, and how do we ensure data protections for the average person in a world where everybody's talking to a computer, theoretically, right? And ultimately started doing work in data privacy, which then got absorbed into the Linux Foundation. So it's cool to say that I actually did some data privacy work at the Linux Foundation, but it was interesting that at that time, as we had just started building our product, I very much was of this mindset of, we have to make sure the information is accurate. We have to ensure a high degree of data security and data privacy for the end user, which at that time, like the big players were Amazon, the big players were Google, the big players were Samsung in the voice space. None of them were really like talking about the data privacy piece of this, specifically like how to ensure the information is accurate. So I think that's always been a large part of what we have built, and that was ingrained in the company. And I like to tell folks that it probably took us a bit longer to build our product RedFox Navigator than it should have, because I was so strict on making sure that the information that we put into the system was accurate and that we protected the folks using it. And especially in healthcare, to your point, right? You can't have inaccurate information being reported to a patient, specifically in what we were doing, where this AI is guiding you through a process that you don't know if the information that's necessarily giving is the right information, but you have to trust that it is. So that's why we built our product. And again, my co-founder, Brett, he's so smart when it comes to this stuff. A constrained system to where we had a foundational model at the base that we built on top of, but our proprietary stack was on top of that. And that was where our constrained technology sat. And what we would do, we would ingest only the accurate information for the specific pharmaceutical company, healthcare provider, whatever it might be related to the device or the home lab kit. And the AI would only pull from that. So especially as large language models started gaining momentum, the RAG architecture is something that really began to take off, and we embraced that and applied it to what we already had. So essentially RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, is you're using a large language model like a ChatGPT, or in our case, we were tapping into Meta's Llama open source LLM. But retrieval augmented generation, meaning it's only retrieving specific information from constrained documents, right? So in our case, we were training it on the structured instructions for use document, any customer support material they had, and the list goes on. But the AI would only be drawing from that specific set of resources, so you mitigated the risk of a hallucination, which is why we never in a million years, went to just use ChatGPT, for example, or Gemini or Claude, because those are such large models. It's really hard to get granular with them and ensure that the information is accurate. And they still hallucinate, because AIs today are still yes machines, right? The whole goal is AI to give you the right answer. And even if it doesn't have the right answer, it's going to make something up to like pat you on the back and be like, see, look, I gave you your answer. So that really was our secret sauce, and why that's important to recovery.com and why there was high interest for our intellectual property is because they're in the behavioral health business, right? So there
Mhm.
are, I need to say are we now, we, because we were part of recovery.com, but our business is helping connect patients with treatment resources faster. And of course, we need to make sure that the information that a patient is getting is entirely accurate as it relates to a treatment center, because there is so much sensitive information in that mix. So I think what's interesting to recovery and why the acquisition happened, in addition to multiple other factors, is they really we had a technology already set to go that they can potentially use, or we can potentially use rather, to implement into their product that meets the standards for patients and for healthcare and the behavioral health space.
When there's a lot of complexity or sensitive information, like where do you feel like there's other opportunities that no one else is really tackling, or maybe you've seen people trying to tackle? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are there.
Like within healthcare specifically, or just
Yeah, yeah.
industry
What have you
wide?
kind of seen that you're like, oh, if someone could figure that out, like that would be awesome? Or do you know of anyone, or just observing from afar, maybe?
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's a good question. That's a big question. I mean, I
yeah.
think the number one thing that I keep seeing in the healthcare space that people are actively working on is touch points with the patient. So
Hmm.
especially on the healthcare system side, they're dinged by the federal government. I mean, and we had extensive conversations with UW Health at one point over a potential partnership, and learned a lot about healthcare systems, how they operate, and the regulations from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, because healthcare systems get dinged if they have readmissions, right? So if a
Hmm.
patient comes in, maybe they have COPD or, a respiratory illness, that's something that's chronic. Well, Medicare will actually say, well, if that patient is readmitted with the next period of time, then you get dinged and you lose this tranche of funding. So I think
Hmm.
one thing that I keep seeing, at least on the healthcare system side, and a lot of people are working on this, is how do you prevent readmissions from happening? How do you make sure that once a patient is discharged, there are enough touch points to ensure that the patient is adhering to the discharge instructions, following their medication appropriately, because medication adherence is a huge problem and one of the primary reasons for readmissions. So a lot happening in that space. And as we know, there is a crisis across healthcare right now of just available labor. We
Hmm.
saw a large tranche of nurses and physicians exit after COVID, rightly so, based on everything that happened. But how are we going to backfill that? There isn't enough people power available. So you have to turn to some of these AI tools and increase those touch points that way. And there are
Yeah,
some new research coming out now, too, saying that if those touch points are made and patients do have access to an AI tool that checks in with them, make sure they're adhering to medication, et cetera, the readmissions rate does drop. So
yeah.
I think that's a really fascinating piece in healthcare. I mean, the list could go on, right? Like drug
Sure,
discovery
sure.
and, revenue cycling. I mean, billing is just a huge pain in the ass for
Yeah, yeah,
healthcare systems. How can we use
yeah,
AI to just help a hospital system be more effective at billing codes? I mean, the list could go
yeah.
on, right? But I,
How
I
can
think that's
hospitals save money, and then also how can we also save money? Like how do both sides win
exactly.
more effectively? It's like,
It's all about providing a higher degree of care while saving money. And that's what this whole
yeah,
value-based care model is that federal government and Medicare, Medicaid try implementing. I think the double-edged sword of that is, hospitals, by nature of just how they're set up in the United States, are money-making entities, whether they're for a not-profit or a for-profit system. So if the goal is to increase the value of care and reduce the amount of people coming in, well, that has then a negative effect on the hospital's profitability and the hospital's ability to stay in business. So, and again, it's a weird vicious cycle, right, in the US
yeah,
that we see right now, where we don't want sick people, but in order for the healthcare system to function, you need sick people.
yeah,
It's,
yeah,
we could have a whole podcast on that topic alone.
yeah. Of course, yeah. I didn't mean to open up a wormhole or whatever. Yeah. How did you work through accessibility, for example, like with the elderly, or for people that are like maybe first time tech users, like they're not used to using some type
Sure.
of medical hardware or something like that? Because obviously everyone has different types of phones and all these different things too. or just internet connectivity if they're in rural areas. Like obviously that's sometimes a barrier for people. I am curious like how you guys kind of tackled that with AI being a part of it.
Yeah, so very early on, we decided that we did not want our product to be a barrier, one, for the patient or the end user, but two, for, the pharma company or the lab company or whoever we were working with. Because if you're giving somebody a tool and then you're asking them to download an app or go set something up, like they're not going to use it unless they absolutely
Mhm.
have to, right? So we went in with the approach of how can we make this as easy to access as possible. So actually, without realizing it, we were really pushing the boundaries of web-enabled AI. So at the time, we built an entirely web-based system, so, very cloud resource intensive, that as long as you had access to the internet on your smartphone, whether that be through cellular or Wi-Fi, you could access our tool directly through your web browser, whether that be on Google Chrome, Safari, Firefox, didn't matter. So that, I think, is the biggest area where we tried to be accessible, is prevent the need from having to download an external app. And we were asked all the time, like, well, why don't you just create an iOS app or, an Android app? I'm like, well, one, do you want to fund that? And two, that's just going to create another barrier to somebody accessing this tool, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In addition to that, we tried getting a large degree of anecdotal data through some early user testing across a diverse population. So I think the big thing that we noticed there was probably more on the nuances of language and how people speak. So the initial version of the product was voice activated, where you could talk to it, right? Well,
Mhm.
human speech is probably the most complex thing there is, right? Because there
Mhm.
are so many different ways to speak with all the different languages we have globally. And then you have dialects to that language. And then you have slang to that language. And then take into account, if you're talking to it on a phone, ambient noise. How do you accommodate
Mhm.
for that? So I think on the language piece of that, Brett got really creative and actually built out a way for the system to, in real time, one, detect the language being spoken, and we could do 90 different languages at the time, and then also narrow down the dialect to that, and then actually translate that on the fly, which at the time we were like, oh, this is neat. Hopefully this will help people. But then reflecting back on it, we're like, wow, nobody else had that, or at least the capability to do that. So that was another way we tried being accessible. When it comes to the elderly population, I don't think we give enough credit to our 65 and older population for how tech savvy they become. There's always
Sure.
going to be a portion of them that just refuse to use it or,
Of
adapt to
course.
it. But
Yeah.
I think what we found, and a story I used to tell, was about my grandpa who, back in 2022, my grandma had to be admitted to the hospital. Got sick, didn't know what from. Anyhow, she was admitted, so I showed up at their house. My grandpa was at the kitchen table, and they had a COVID test kit sitting there. And I'm like, Grandpa, did you guys actually use this? Did you see if Grandma had COVID? And he was like, no. Open up the box, and I said, hell with it, because this is too confusing. But he knew what we were working on at the time. And he said, but I wish I would have had what you guys have. I think that
Hmm.
would have helped me a lot. And I was like, interesting. Thank you, but
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting. And I get he's just like one example, right? But
Sure.
there's a lot more of my grandpas out there that have a smartphone, and that as long as it's easy enough to use, they could use it. So all that to say, we went into this trying to be as accessible as possible. Of course, there are always areas where we could have done that better. I think that goes for any technology product. But we
Yeah.
really believed in trying to limit the number of barriers to accessing our tool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Um, now I kind of want to talk about your exit, selling RedFox AI, and it's very fresh, obviously, very, very
And
fresh.
it is. We're 3 weeks
Congratulations
out.
again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I guess I want to ask, did you always envision that you'd be building it to sell it? Or was it, or was there like a moment that happened where like, this kind of makes sense? Also, like, maybe even talking about just the relationship with your co-founder. It sounds like obviously like it's been really great over the past 5 years, and just how you have that conversation together to say, hey, like this is what we're going to do. This is what's next. So
Yeah. So when Brett and I started RedFox, we knew the end goal was to be acquired. What
Hmm.
we didn't know is how that was going to happen, right? And I think it'd be foolish of any startup founder to say at the outset they know exactly how that's going to happen. Because you don't, right? That's like trying to peer into a crystal ball covered in haze. Like you can't do it. So we knew we were building this to be acquired. And I think one of the fundamental questions that I was asked early on by a close friend and mentor of mine after he and I got to know each other, and I still a close friend of mine today, respect him a ton, but he sat me down and he asked, "Do you want to be rich or do you want to be king?"
Hmm.
And I was like, interesting question. I was like, I've never been asked that. He goes, "Well, what's your answer?" And I go, "I want to be rich." He's like, "That's the right answer." And it's an interesting question, right? Because it sets the stage to really gauge where your thought process is as a founder, as an entrepreneur. Because if you want to be rich, you ultimately know the end game one is to probably be acquired or IPO or whatever that might be. But you also know when to get out of your own way to make sure that's possible. If you
Hmm.
want to be king, you're probably not going to get out of your own way. And there's a greater likelihood that your business will probably fail. That is how I interpreted that question. He explained it to me after the fact, and he's like, "I never want to work with people who want to be."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's crazy.
Continued to mention that to folks, and they're like, "Wow, that's really good. I should use that." Actually, I was catching up with a friend of mine who's a venture capitalist here in Madison, and I actually told her that story for the first time. She's like, "Wow, I need to start asking that to the companies that I'm trying to figure out if they want to invest in or not." So I
Yeah.
was asked that very early on, and I knew that there might be a point where in order for RedFox to succeed, I would not be involved in that if that meant acquisition or if we grew big enough to IPO, right?
Yeah.
So that was always on the roadmap. I knew there was a chance I wouldn't be involved in it. But ultimately, I think for us, it emerged because of relationships. It emerged because of proximity. We moved into StartingBlock Madison in April of 2021 because I needed to get the hell out of my house. I could not stand working at home anymore. We were still in the thralls of COVID, but I just couldn't do it. And I remember when StartingBlock opened back in 2017, I think it was. And I told myself, I want to have an office here. And at the time, you couldn't get in. Like the entire place was filled to the brim with companies and
Oh, wow.
entrepreneurs and found, yes. COVID hit, of course, then every co-working space took a hit and I don't think
Hmm.
have fully recovered. But I just knew I wanted an office there, and I knew that just being around people would result in positive things for us. So we moved in. Brett and I were working out there pretty regularly. And at the time, it was us, it was Rehab Path, which is recovery.com now. And then a couple other people who were just solopreneurs kind of working there. And I'll never forget the day when we were working, and then our pod or our office space was literally like 20 feet from where recovery.com's office was at the time. So Ben and Jeremiah come walking out one day and they're like, "Hey, we haven't met you guys yet." And we just started talking. They're like, "What do you do?" And we told them what we do. And they're like, "Oh, that's really cool. Well, here's what we do." And then it was just, I don't know. Over time, I got involved in more things. Ben and I started running in the same circles. We became
Yeah.
friends. And then just being in proximity to Rehab Path, we got to know Olivia on the team. We got to know more people on the team and just built a good relationship with them. Never with the intent of thinking like we'd ever be working with them. But it's funny because one day Brett told me jokingly, I think it was just it's one of the lower days in the startup journey. He's like, "Hey Nick, if it all else fails, we'll just go work with Rehab."
So that was your
Only
exit strategy either way.
life works in mysterious ways. But yeah,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
and Brett reminded me of that story, as we were nearing the finish line on this. But
Sure.
one thing led to another, and a few years later, we actually had an opportunity to be acquired last year that didn't work out. But
Oh.
Ben and I being good friends, I talk with him about that, and he and I often, I should say pretty regularly, catch up for over happy hour and just, as friends, talk about what's going on in each other's life, businesses, etc. And this was in December of last year. Ben and I were at happy hour catching up. And for the first time, we had just like a really good conversation about AI. and then about what we do and our product and our talent. And, I could see him sitting there digesting that. And then he told me that heading into 25, one of their OKRs for the year was to get an AI evangelist or make AI a priority all across the company. And then kind of jokingly, he got silent for a moment and he looked at me. He's like, well, why don't we just acquire you? And I was like, I never thought of that being a possibility. That conversation then led to another conversation, which led to another conversation. And, 4 or 5 months later, we were able to bring it home and it actually happened.
That's awesome.
So, we didn't expect that. Of course, like I said, when you start your entrepreneurial founder journey, you never really know where that opportunity is going to come from. But, just through the multiple conversations we had with Ben and Jeremiah, and we even did a trial project with them just to date and see what working together would be like, there was a strong value alignment.
Yeah.
And I think that's fundamental for any acquisition, whether it's a smaller acquisition like ours or like the multi-billion-dollar acquisitions of these massive companies, right? If you don't have a value alignment, it probably isn't going to work out in the long term, or there's going to be a lot of very disappointed people along for that ride who will jump ship. So we really wanted to make sure that there was a mutual value alignment, which there was, and cultural fit, and that was the case. So here we are now.
Today's episode is brought to you by Headway, a digital product agency based in Wisconsin. Do you need to design and build a world-class user experience for your software, but feeling like you just can't get there on your own? That's where Headway comes in. We're the folks who help ambitious startups and enterprise teams bring their product ideas to life through design, development, and product strategy. We don't just give you user interface designs and leave you to figure out the rest. We work with you and your target customers to create beautiful user experiences, build scalable design systems, and provide Silicon Valley level talent to get it done right the first time. Whether you're launching a new software or just looking to add features, we've got your back. We've worked with startups in industries like logistics, healthcare, fintech, and edtech, helping them solve their biggest software challenges. And here's the thing, no matter how complex your product is, we can help you gain clarity and get the job done together. We're so confident that we'll be the right fit that we offer a 50% money back guarantee if you don't think we're working out within the first 45 days. Ready to see how we can help you and your team? Just head over to headway.io and book a free consultation today. This kind of lines up into the next thing I wanted to talk about was just, how did kind of the Madison startup health tech scene, you obviously you're like, when I saw this place open up, StartingBlock, you're like, I want to be in there. When I can get in there, I want to be in there. And you ended up in there, and obviously these relationships formed, and obviously you ended up where you're at, like you just shared. I'm just curious, how that happened for you. Like, were you always aware of the scene and the people and like the programs and the organizations in the area, or how did you kind of come across it, over the last, 10 to 15 years? I'm just kind of curious, like how it kind of formed for you over time.
Sure. Yeah, when we got our start, I had just moved back down from Stevens Point after graduating. I decided to live in Madison because my grandparents live over in Middleton and have since the late 90s, so I practically grew up here on summer and winter breaks. I have an aunt and uncle that live in the Lodi area up in Columbia County, and then all my friends were here. So I knew this is where I wanted to start my life. Had a good job, good opportunity coming out of college, but as Brett and I started brainstorming what kind of business we wanted to start, I think the good thing that I had going for me is I'm just a very social person, and I will actively seek out networking opportunities and just any opportunity to meet people and get involved, because I wholeheartedly just think people are intriguing and are fascinating. And I just love talking and meeting new people. So as we got our start, it actually was a lot of my formal background is in marketing, so it was a lot of marketing events at the time. LinkedIn was blowing up with videos, so LinkedIn local events, and that's how I started running, at least in the marketing crowd in town. And then as we started putting work into RedFox, and this is informally before we actually got things formally founded in 2020, I went to a LinkedIn local event where I met Angela and another colleague at I met Angela and another colleague at the Wisconsin Technology Council.
Oh, sure.
And Angela and I pretty much hit it off right away. She was telling me about the Tech Council and resources and all that. So I'm like, okay, well, that's intriguing. So that I just started talking with them more, started going to events. They were kind enough, at the time I was developing a pretty prolific speaking career across the country and actually globally at that time.
Wow,
So they
that's crazy. I
invite,
didn't know
yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah, there's a
Side
whole
note
nother,
here. I'm like,
there's a whole nother part of my life prior to even
I was
founding
just gonna
RedFox
say,
where I was
that's
traveling the world talking about AI. That's a whole other
follow-up
thing.
episode.
Yeah. But yeah, they saw that I had developed a pretty prolific speaking career locally, nationally, internationally, and were kind enough to invite me to speak at one of their events where I met Tom Still for the first time, and he and I hit it off right away. And he and I became friends, and he became a bit of a mentor, and I just got really involved in their ecosystem and their resources, and I just, went to every lunch I could, and then Tom would introduce me to people, Angela would introduce me to people, and then, by nature of that, I get connected to people in Milwaukee, so that's how I met Dan Sem and the work that he does out there at the time when he was with Concordia and CU Ventures and the Healthcare Innovation Pitch, which we applied and won in 2022, and it just kept snowballing, and then I met people up in the Green Bay area just going to events in the ecosystem, and then I don't know. I guess for me, it's hard to say what I did because I was just doing what I do best, which is just go and talk to people, and I'm very passionate about the stuff that I work on. So by nature of just being an entrepreneur, I got very passionate over entrepreneurship. And then, that evolved into me turning into a bit of an advocate during the last biennium budget cycle. I was going up to the Capitol, meeting with lawmakers, actually one of the joint finance committee co-chairs that, we had a little bit of an exchange at a WisPolitics lunch, and I wanted to make him put his money where his mouth was. So I met with him, and we ended up getting $25 million more for the Badger Fund. And so it's hard for me to say how I got connected to the resources, because I actually couldn't tell you this is what I did specifically.
Sure.
I just maintained my curiosity and kept going to events, putting myself out there, making sure people knew who I was. And it just exploded, I guess, in that regard.
You're not just your intentions, because obviously there's networking for
right.
Obviously there's a selfish aspect to networking,
sure,
just by the nature of it. But it just sounds like you're the kind of person where your intention behind these relationships is oh, I want to make sure that this is mutually beneficial. I want to make sure that I know they're going to help me, but I want to make sure I'm, following up with them, helping them out in whatever way I can to the best of my ability, right. You don't want to burn out, just, always helping people all the time. There's obviously people to do that and it's great, but at some point, it is balance, right?
No, for sure. And I've always viewed relationships from that regard. And I was lucky enough to have a very good mentor back in 2017, 2018. She and I unfortunately have lost touch now, but she worked at Microsoft and she was mentoring me and building my personal brand and who I wanted to be. And I decided I wanted to be that person that people knew, but they knew that I wanted to get to know them genuinely. I wanted to see how I could help them. It wasn't about how they could help me. It was about how I could help them. And one of my strategies, and I will preach this from the rooftops, is if, you meet somebody and you're talking about how we could help each other, if they make an offer to help you, always end it with, well, what can I do? And most people don't expect anything in return, but you'd be surprised at how many people I've said that to are shocked that I'm even saying, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And that's genuine intent. And that's how you build a relationship with somebody. And I'm glad that's come across because I haven't tried to be anything other than that. Right. And to your point, we all have a motivation. We all have intention. But I think it's super clear when the intention is for personal gain versus I'm genuinely interested in you, your work, and your life as a person. And I want to learn from you. I view every interaction as a learning experience or an opportunity to learn from somebody.
Yeah, I want to actually talk about, because you keep bringing up mentors. Like, do you feel like there's a good, I don't even know the word to use. I don't want to say platform, because I don't want to like people to think in their heads like, oh, it's software or whatever. Do you think there's a good mechanism right now in, like, whether it's in Madison or in Wisconsin, for for founders to find a good mentor? Like, do you feel like that's something there's
Yeah.
a huge opportunity for? Like, how are you doing that right now? Obviously, you're just meeting with people; it's organically happening. But like, are you aware of like other programs or people that are trying to like coordinate those kind of things? Or I guess I'm curious what you're seeing.
Oh, for sure. I think the big one that comes to mind is Susie Yonkle's program, Merlin Mentors. So
Okay.
Susie, of course, being based in Madison, she and her husband Matt have had success being entrepreneurs. And Susie and Matt both firmly believe in resources and what can we do to help foster an ecosystem where everybody feels like they have a resource or a mentor. So I wish I knew how long exactly, but for a very long time, Susie has been managing and leading the Merlin Mentors program in Madison. So if you're a startup founder, you can apply to Merlin Mentors, and she will pair you with a mentor within their program that will help coach you through, usually the initial phases of your business, and it can be from all across the board, right? But that's a great resource. Most people and most startup founders I know have used that.
Okay.
Um, I think for me, it was one of those things I found out about it as a resource while I was a bit farther along in my journey. So I was
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
already have like a really solid group of people, but I tell folks about it all the time who are looking for a mentor. I go, Merlin's probably a great place to start.
Sure.
I really can't speak for what's going on in Milwaukee.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. So, because from my perspective, Merlin is only in Madison. Yeah.
Yes, it is only in Madison. I know in Milwaukee, like with Midwest Founders Community, I know they've really tried bringing people together, and I think
Hmm.
mentorship just happens organically from that. I know
Yeah.
during Healthcare Innovation Pitch, Dan Sem paired us with a mentor. It was a short-term thing, but I do believe that can be an ongoing thing if you want it to be. So the resources and the programs are there. I think you just have to find them, and I think one of
Yeah.
the big problems we've always had as an ecosystem in Wisconsin is knowing where to start.
Hmm.
Which I know there's like Start in Wisconsin and all this stuff, but like I just keep hearing this feedback, Jacob, over and over and over again from new founders that like until they like met that one person that held their hand to get them involved, they like, I don't even know where to go. I don't know
Yeah.
what resources are available. I don't, you know,
Yeah.
who's WEDC? Like
Yeah. All these acronyms, you're like, I don't know, never heard of it. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think that is one thing that we as an ecosystem can do a lot better. And of course, the Tech Council is a resource, BioForward's a resource. The stuff's there. It's unfortunately you don't know about it unless you know of somebody in it already who can
Yeah.
point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and that's something that we're trying to tackle is like, how do we like we think of Startup Wisconsin as like the front door like to the ecosystem. We're not trying to replace or do better than what's already here because, like you said, there's already like incredible resources. Okay, how do we like show the people the way sooner than later? Like,
Yes.
hey, here's like your introduction, and and we do know like even like you were talking about like there's already a platform that exists, but I think sometimes um the way it's presented can be overwhelming. Like, I don't even know what to search in this thing. Like, there's like a lot here. So it does make you think, like we're considering like more of like a concierge type approach where you're going to meet with a new founder, you're going to meet with this person, and they're just going to listen and understand what you're going through and what you're trying to figure out. And then they would have a good sense of the ecosystem and be able to be like, hey, sound based on where you're at, like there's three people I want to introduce you to, and here's a couple programs or organizations you should check out
Yeah.
that might be of interest to you.
Yeah.
Because
No, and
sometimes it's like when people are like just navigating a site, they just also might be too busy to even like, I don't even know what's here. I don't know if it's even good for
exactly.
me. But that human connection, I think, is like it's hard to like replace that with like an app or hey, we're gonna make a new platform, make a profile, and like like even when you were saying with medical devices, like nobody wants to download a thing and have to keep logging into it. It's just another thing. And it's like, so how do we kind of like, kind of fix that? And again, it's not that we're going to like solve every single problem for every single person, but like, how do we kind of like increase, or I guess reduce the time it takes for them to meet that right person and increase their chances of luck, right? Like that's kind of it. Like
Oh,
it's not, you can't guarantee success for anyone, so to speak.
exactly. And,
Yeah.
I know for a fact a lot of founders getting started, like maybe some of them have saved up a good chunk of cash that they can allocate to the business. Maybe they are, doing double duty and they're working a full-time job while doing this. I know cash is always an issue, but there are so many good free resources in the state. Like the number
Yes.
one resource that comes to mind for me is the small business development clinic that is offered through UW-Madison that's available statewide to anybody, right? And then you have the law and entrepreneurship clinic. So you don't have to go and spend $500 an hour on an attorney right away. You could use a resource like that. So there are a lot of resources, but again, it's a bit of an insular bubble. And until
Mm-hmm.
you like crack into the bubble, it's very hard to like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and also too, like because when you're a founder, there's just so much to think through. And your mind will make you focus on the thing that you think is the most important thing to focus on right now versus like, actually, let's just get this stuff figured out first. Like, obviously that is important, but like you were saying, the legal part, like figuring out your business model, figuring out like, maybe there's some tax code things that I can work through to figure out, like I can have some tax savings. Like I don't, right. Like whatever little things you can figure out, um, for your business that can, give you more runway. So like, oh, we're trying to get our customers or trying to get this thing built or whatever. You're like, yeah, it's important. But like, do you also have this other stuff figured out that like will legally allow your business to
Exactly.
function or, stuff like
Well, and
that.
that's
So, yeah.
and that, Jacob, I honestly think is like that's the toughest part is just understanding the operational part of all this and like having to file like articles of incorporation with, the state of Wisconsin, or if you want to be a C Corp with Delaware and then getting a tax ID number and then
Yeah.
figuring out what forms you need to file. Like there's all that in addition to just trying to work on your product and find product market fit and do everything else that a startup requires, right? And
Yeah.
I do think like I would love to see more resources to help founders navigate just the legal piece of this. And maybe it's not even the
Mm.
legal piece, it's just like getting it incorporated, opening a bank account, getting business insurance, like all of that stuff that you
Yeah.
don't immediately think about, but is really the bedrock of your company.
Yeah. Yeah. It allows you to exist,
Right,
basically.
exactly. And
um,
quite frankly, like the the government entities that oversee this are very unforgiving. They don't care whether you know or not, but if you miss this deadline and didn't file this paperwork and pay this check, they're going to come after you for it.
yeah. 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 Well, just be mindful of your time. I do want to move on to life, after RedFox. Like you're in this new role, recovery.com. You spoke about it a little bit, but I am kind of curious, are you able to share any of the things that you're hoping to do with them or just your approach? And just just obviously being a part of a team, like how you think about innovation too, versus like I'm the founder, I can make decisions, or
Right.
or does Ben is giving you the freedom to like do this? Obviously, you're making decisions together. I'm just curious what that's like
Yeah,
for you.
I'd say, yeah, on the whole, my priority first and foremost in this role as director of AI innovation is to help enable AI all across recovery.com, whether that be on the operational side and figuring out within each team if we're using a tool, how that tool can be used better to create more efficiency. If there's a tool available that we're not using, can we use that tool? Does it fit in? And then
Mm-hmm.
on the flip side, the product side, right? Like, how can we use AI to make our product better and more personalized to our users and our patients coming to us to find treatment resources? I think the big picture vision is somebody coming to recovery.com and typing in, I'm so and so, I've been an alcoholic for 13 years. I'm at the point where I'm ready to seek recovery options. Here's my age, gender, all this information, insurance. And then they can get a personalized set of treatment options or treatment center resources tailored to exactly what they need. I know we've
Mm-hmm.
talked about that, and I think that ultimately is the big picture vision. But to Ben and Jeremiah's credit, they have fully recognized that AI is just one of those transformational technologies similar to the internet and mobile. And they do not want to miss the boat on that. They do not want to be left behind. And that was a large part about why this acquisition happened as well, because, we were at our team huddle on Wednesday. And Jeremiah I admire him because he's super, super smart and prescriptive with things that he says, but he's also like really funny. And like he got up to do his piece for the huddle and he showed us like a picture of this empty looking warehouse or like back room somewhere. And he's like, this is the Joanne Fabrics over on the west side. He's like, they're gone. Like as of last night when I took this picture, like they're no more. He's like, I don't want us to be the next Joanne Fabrics. And went on to talk about not missing the boat on AI and why that is such a fundamental piece to recovery.com moving forward, because they recognize the shift that's happening, right?
Sure.
So a lot of my initial work will be to identify the opportunities within the organization where we can use AI tools both internally and how do we actually do some cool things with the product that really benefit our users. And, recognizing that I'm good in front of people and have a public speaking talent, part of my job will also be to go out and represent recovery.com at, conferences and trade shows and other events where I can talk about what we're doing with AI, how we're being innovative in the behavioral health space, further, growing our market reach to the folks we're trying to get to use the platform. So, and there's a lot more to it as well. And I think it'll be one of those things that'll be evolving over time, but
yeah, I'm curious because from what I've read in the past, you've been involved with some AI policy or just I don't even know like what that looked like exactly, but I'm just curious around like, do you imagine you and recovery.com being involved with AI policy that's happening in Madison and in Wisconsin and to just be a part of that conversation?
Yeah, I think from a policy perspective, that is definitely something that I've talked about with the team here. And ultimately, I do view my innovation role kind of at some point expanding to include some public policy initiatives. So like, how can we as recovery.com go and meet with lawmakers potentially about protecting certain grant funding for mental health and behavioral health treatment programs?
Sure.
Is there policy that'll emerge at some point that will make access to treatment more widely available through insurance providers? Like all that's to be determined, right? But I do foresee that being on the roadmap. I think as it comes to AI policy specifically, that'll just be me championing what I've always done, and being Nick Myers, the citizen. Mr. Myers goes to Washington to meet with our state lawmakers and federal lawmakers about proper AI policy and regulation, because I think my biggest fear, Jacob, right now that keeps me up at night with AI is the general public. And to their credit, no, AI is important, but there is a gross lack of understanding the gravity of how this is going to affect the labor market.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't hyperbolize when I say that. I did countless hours of research when I was working with the Linux Foundation into AI's impact on the labor market at the time. And at the time, a lot of this data was pointing to, it's going to be similar to like the internet or the Industrial Revolution, where sure, it'll automate some jobs, but it'll have a net positive effect on that, a complementary effect where maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 new jobs are created as a result. At the time, I agreed with that. This was before large language models. This was before ChatGPT. This was before Claude 4 being able to program better than an entry-level engineer. I don't agree with that anymore. And I easily foresee within the next 3 to 5 years, potentially even sooner, we are going to see a huge reaping of entry-level positions in the United States and quite honestly, globally, because these tools are growing exponentially day by day in their capability. Mm-hmm. And we are just not talking about that enough. We are not strategizing enough about that. And the government's approach right now is very laissez-faire, right? Because they want to compete with China, which great. I also want to compete with China in the AI space. But if we don't try and mitigate some of this now through proper policy and regulation, this massive wave of unemployment is going to hit us. And then you're going to have this huge backlash from the general public. And we're going to start having drum circles of no AI and this anti-AI movement, which I still
Hmm.
foresee is probably happening. But that's the biggest thing that keeps me up at night is this is just
Yeah.
going to happen like snap of a finger, flick of a switch, and we are not going to be prepared for that. And
Yeah.
I want lawmakers. And the thing is, the politicians know this is coming, at least some of them do. But you also don't want to bring up to your constituents that there's going to be job loss because no politician wants to talk about.
Yeah, of course.
But
Yeah.
we need.
It's go ahead,
I'm just
sorry.
saying to cap off my soapbox here, we need to be talking about this more, specifically on the AI safety data privacy side. But again, how this is going to affect the labor market, and we need policy and regulation, good policy and regulation that simultaneously protects that innovation and development, but also protects the average person.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a it's hard to know because we don't know how it's fully going to play out yet, like timelines and scale, like, but yeah, like if you really look at it, like, yeah, data entry won't be necessary by a person other than if the computer or the tool is asking you a question about yourself to gather data, right? It'll no longer be whatever we know today, and it's hard to imagine the future, right? It's hard to,
Right.
even when people talked about horses to automobiles and
Exactly.
and electricity, like you can't, like, or even cell phones, like, people, my dad always jokes like, yeah, I used to watch Star Trek and now we have cell phones and we have like computers in our hands and
Which is
all that
funny that
stuff.
like a technology like cell phones have only been around really in mass the last 15 years, right? If you
Yeah.
consider our history, like it's still a new technology when you think about it, relatively
Yeah.
speaking.
But it's also more manageable because it's like in a box where like
Right.
this whole thing is like it affects everyone in every which way you can think of. It's just kind of like, so I think, yeah, it's hard because like, people say, oh, it'll create different jobs in the future. And it's like, well, what do those look like? And, or is it one of those things where like, if the US is successful, like there's enough new revenue generation from our country that it says, hey, now that we have all this extra revenue and hopefully our debt hasn't skyrocketed, there's that whole conversation too. But right, like that, it would say, hey, now the government's gonna create new jobs that employs people to do things because we want to employ people. Like,
And
right.
and that
And those things would be community driven efforts, things like that, the arts, whatever, hopefully, right. And obviously you could have other things too, but like, I'm just kind of spitballing. But like, that's the hope, is that these innovations help save and create enough revenue that it offsets the
right,
job losses somehow to create new opportunities for
right.
people to have a sense of purpose in their life.
No,
It's like, that's the other thing too. It's like people think
right.
about that. It's like, oh,
Well, exactly.
um,
And I do ultimately believe that economic output is going to be driven upward substantially. Be foolish of me to say that maybe like we were expecting another roaring 20s in the 2020s. That clearly didn't happen. But maybe that's in the 2030s, right? When this stuff hits an inflection point and it just goes gangbusters. But the double-edged coin of that is if we're increasing GDP by like a factor of 10 because of AI tools making us 10 times more productive, if not more, our whole system of economics relies on infinite growth. Well, what if
mm,
these tools get so good? Like, how do you keep infinite growth if
yeah.
people aren't working because the tools are doing everything? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the type of
it's a
stuff
weird
that,
question.
yeah,
It's,
that
yeah,
and we could have like 10 podcast episodes
yeah,
on that alone. But
yeah,
that's what
and
keeps me up at night.
yeah, and I do think though, like, if we think about, for example, like all the Google stuff lately with the video and like everyone talking about Hollywood lately and music and like, I do think that like there will always be a place for like real like film. People are still
Oh,
gonna
absolutely.
choose, like society will say, I don't want, like you were saying before, like I don't want to see AI created productions. Like I want to see something that like the human race like put
Right.
together, like hard,
Exactly.
blood, sweat, and tears. Like that's what I want to support and do. And in theater has been that, like people want to go see theater or go see orchestras because they want that experience and they want to support the arts and stuff. So I
Absolutely.
do feel like that'll kind of evolve as it should. But like the other side of it, of like what jobs look like and what the AI even looks like, or because I think part of it is we think like, oh, it just replaces what we know today. But like the systems that we'll have in 10 to 20 years will be completely different than the systems we have
Sure,
right now. Like the way
absolutely.
we do things and think about things will just be completely different. And so we've never had that really before in history.
No,
Like,
we
because
haven't.
usually the rate of change isn't so fast. It's a lot more, you can kind of, when people hate change, but they kind of deal with it. This will be just
Well,
different. Like,
and it's even more
yeah,
interesting right now because not only are we having this massive societal civilization-wide change with AI happening, but we're also at like the apex of people having the most distrust in their institutions they've ever had.
yeah,
And like that's not a good combo,
no, no,
like
no, yeah,
we need to have trust in institutions as this change happens, and I'm hopeful that in the next few years that pendulum swings back and we can start rebuilding some of that trust in our institutions against not just the US though, this is all over the world.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but that's going to be necessary for us to navigate this renaissance, if you want to call it. I mean, renaissance probably not even the right word. This explosion of automation and
yeah,
intelligent technology that is staring at us right in the face.
yeah, yeah. Well, on that note, we'll wrap things up. No,
Probably didn't
but
expect it to go
we
this
are.
direction, did you?
um, yeah, it's like, as we wrap things up, though, it's like it's one of those weird things where it's like you want to be really optimistic, but you're also like your brain's like, let's be realistic for a second and think
Exactly.
about
Yes.
what we're saying. So, yes, I think it's good to have like that sober perspective, and just, but also I think, like you said, there needs to be more conversations, and I think that's really important. So I just want to say thank you for being one of those people, specifically, right, in a state that we live in, which is really great. So thank you,
Absolutely.
Nick.
I appreciate that. And I'm like I said, I do this work because I care about it. I care about the people that it's going to affect. So, you
Mhm.
know, small to small, as I made in a LinkedIn post, I think earlier this week, small wins can have a big impact or a big
Yeah.
outcome. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well, if anyone's like curious to learn more about what you're doing or to connect with you and maybe ask questions if they're curious about things that you did with RedFox or anything like that, or maybe want to be mentored by you, how can they get a hold of you and what can that look like?
absolutely. I'd say LinkedIn is probably the best way. I do tend to monitor like connection requests and everything. I've gotten pretty good at sussing out like who's there to connect with me because they want to connect versus sell me something. So
Sure.
I would say that's a good spot. My email is nick@recovery.com. So feel free to always send me an email there. You can still go to the RedFox website and see what we were working on. That is still up.
Sure.
There is a nice banner at the top, though, announcing the acquisition, redirecting you over to the recovery.com site. But, I'd also encourage you to go to recovery.com and take a look at what we're building and working on because it is having an impact on the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people coming to search for treatment resources day in and day out. So I really do encourage you to go take a look at what we're building. And if you want to be a part of that, please reach out to us.
Thanks for joining us on the Startup Wisconsin podcast. Want to support the show? Don't forget to subscribe and get updates. If you're feeling generous, you can share, rate, and review our podcast to help others find us. All right, folks, until next time, let's keep moving Wisconsin forward.